Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Metaphysical Egypt. I'm Allan Peoples again with Patricia Awion Lehman. Hi.
Hey, Alan.
This is our part two of star seeds. Let's just get right into it.
Sounds like a plan. Yeah, this is going to be fun. If you remember in the last presentation, we spoke about, of course, the seeds and the agricultural cycles being about the cycles of man being planted into the night cycle. And we spoke about the seasons and the celebrations and festivals, such as the Kodiak Festival, when they made the corn mummies of Osiris. And we're going to take that further in this second part of star seeds, and show you some things that I find to be incredibly fascinating. So let's get started. And I go right into it. So if you remember, in these they had these coffins shaped like Sokar or Osiris, and remember, we are Osiris, right? Every man is Osiris. The land is Osiris. This perception of reality in form is Osiris. And so they make these coffins during this Kodiak festival, and they plant seeds, corn, barley, and wheat. And of course, it grows into all these wonderful, this great harvest in which they take the corn, wheat, and barley and make bread cakes. So I found this wonderful article in my research, because I was so fascinated with this Kodiak festival. And I found this article by D.N. Boswell called Eating the Body of Osiris as Broken Bread. And I'm sure that brings to mind, in so many minds, about communion that so many of us who were brought up as Christians celebrated at different times of the year in church. And so I'm just going to dive right into this. In the article, he says, becoming barley of Lower Egypt is this bush of life which went forth from Osiris to grow on the ribs of Osiris and to nourish the plebs, which makes the gods divine and transfigures the ox, right? Which provisions the owners of doubles and the owners of property, which makes cakes for the ox, which causes the living to grow, and which makes firm the bodies of the living.
The Ach is the light body.
Is the light body. It's what we're all striving to return to. We are light beings, and we've spoken about this at great length, but we have this illusion that we are in form, we are physical bodies. And so, yes, they are speaking about the harvest, the light bodies. And to me, this gives us a much greater understanding, of what we experienced at communion and why, they took an ancient Egyptian ritual or part of a festival and part of a ritual, and brought that forward into into one of the world's major religions that people are practicing today. I think it gives us a greater understanding of what it is, what the ritual of communion actually represents. So I'll continue. There it is, right there, straight from the holy scriptures of ancient Egypt. The flesh of Osiris was transformed into grain, which was then used to make cakes of bread. For example, part of his body literally became bread and was eaten. Eat now the body of Christ, eat now the body of Osiris, right? The body of Osiris was substantiated into bread which imparted divine power of life. So again, the bread again is symbolic of this whole process of the seed being planted and then the harvest. This is the harvest. This is the resurrection. This is and so when you're taking part of this body, you're recognizing that aspect of the cycle, the rebirth, the resurrection. And I think why we do it at Easter, or what we did it when we were practicing. So of course, the whole concept, we see all these wonderful images on papyrus and on the walls in temples and tombs of this harvest bringing in the sheaves.
Mm.
We will come rejoicing because this is a moment of great celebration, the harvest. We have achieved our goal. Whoops. And so, I love this because it shows you exactly how they made the bread and how important it was. So it so happens that scented loaves of bread accompany the Sokar figure in the Assyrian mysteries described at Dendera, called Ofen loaves. They are baked in special molds that mark them as representations of Osiris's body parts. So you remember Osiris's body is cut into 42 pieces to represent the 42 gnomes.
Mm.
Well, this becomes incredibly important when we talk about the Hebset festival because
the gnomes being the 42 areas of Egypt, 42 tribes.
Thank you, Allan. Yes, the divisions of Egypt. So again, separation consciousness is what, the underlying theme.
Mm.
But all of these gnomes, the 42, were different body parts of Osiris that Set, his jealous brother, had planted throughout Egypt. But one aspect of the Hebset festival is the king would eat a loaf from each one of the gnomes. So think about that. This is the reunification of the land.
You're reassembling the parts of Osiris into one cake, which then you eat, and it becomes a part of you.
Well, into many cakes that you eat, and you take it into your body, which then reunites, all of the lands within.
Right.
Fascinating.
Anubis does his digestion, and
exactly. So yeah, just amazing. But it gets better. So later on in the myth, after the spring equinox, Set would dismember the corpse of Osiris and thus cause his bodily fluids, including his blood, to bleed out into the Nile River. This bleeding eventually caused the water level to rise. Here we have the inundation, imbued it with rich minerals from Ethiopia, and turned the Nile River into blood. This myth was how the Egyptians explained the origin of the Nile's annual flooding season. The great inundation, as they called it, which was essential to the success of their crops and thus essential to their survival. As the water levels rose with the flooding each year, excess soil full of minerals washed into the Nile, giving it a reddish color. And through the inundation of the Nile, Osiris watered all the crops with his blood. How cool, right? When you think about it symbolically, it's just really, really, really beautiful. Again, reunification of the land with the blood of Osiris. Take now and drink, right?
And is that red color from iron? Is it paramagnetic minerals? What's going on?
Yeah, it is. It's all, when you see a river flood, and I've seen this so many times, even growing up in the country in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. When you get the floods, the water turns, a deep, dark color. And in this case, it turned blood red, which is fascinating. So yeah, as the Greek and Roman authors noted, the Nile water turned red during the inundation, which suggests the color of wine. The color of wine, when it was red, and even disregarding its association with the mythological story, already suggested an association with blood and the life-giving force of nature. As this association was not limited to ancient Egyptian culture, it is all more possible to believe that the symbolic association of wine and blood did exist in Egypt. And of course it did. So here's a beautiful picture of what happens to the Blue Nile before and after the floods. So you can see definitely turns color. And so, it's just so amazing, the artistry of how they developed their mythology and their ritual to emulate the forces of nature. Just beautiful. And so this is why Osiris was called the Lord of Wine. From the pyramid texts, behold, Osiris has come as Orion, Lord of Wine, in the Wag festival. The Wag festival was celebrated at the beginning of the inundation on the 17th, 18th, or 19th of Thoth, first month of the inundation. So Osiris epitomized resurrection. There may be a certain connection between Osiris as the god of vegetation and rejuvenation, and the symbolic coming of life of the grapevine. So here we have some, very, very ancient basis for some modern rituals. Take now and drink. In summary, it was believed that the blood of Osiris turned water into wine, and that as the source of water for the grapevine, ultimately his blood literally became wine as well. Thus, wine became a symbol for his blood. Now, while on the subject of wine, the Egyptians didn't always make their wine out of grapes. There was a different wine which they actually invented, a wine that has become arguably the most significant contribution of Egypt to the world culture, and that wine being wine made out of grains. So beer, basically. So it's basically saying, the Egyptians invented beer. Everything comes from Egypt, right? So again, I want to point out that this comes from articles written by D.N. Boswell, which you can find on the internet. I just found it.
Wouldn't you say their beer, though, was more of a kombucha than a beer as we would think of, like a lager?
Well, it certainly didn't taste like our beer does today. I've never had the ancient beer, but I'm sure it was quite different. But every bit as intoxicating, and maybe more so. Who knows? Yeah. They did call it festivals of drunkenness.
A form of currency, wasn't it? People were paid in beer.
Probably at one time, but definitely, yeah. Beer was very popular, and again.
I would rather drink a glass of beer than a glass of Nile water. So.
Well, that's exactly what I was just going to say. Exactly. It was probably a lot safer to drink wine and beer than the Nile River water. So, without a doubt, at some point in time. So where I want to go with this is, yes, to point that out. And yes, we're going to bring this into a future presentation about other rituals. But I also want to point out that this whole idea of the Koyak Festival, corn mummies, brings us to another understanding of what the boxes represent. And, these stone boxes, what we're looking at now is one of the huge boxes in the Serapeum. And the Serapeum is a subterranean complex found at Saqqara in northern Egypt, Lower Egypt. And
this is one of the most incredible sites in all of Egypt, as far as I'm concerned.
And, we are going to discuss the Serapeum at great length in the future, but I want to point out that it's quite possible that these boxes were used to store seeds at one time. And in some respects, when I walk inside, I feel like I'm walking in a Noah's Ark, or even one of the modern seed banks. And by the way, Serapis is actually written as Wasir. Wasir is the name of Osiris. It's Osiris Apis. So Serapis, from which we get Serapeum, is actually basically Osiris is Serapis. And Serapis became a Greek god. The name Serapis was the Greek name for Osiris, but it comes from putting the Apis and Osiris together as the form of the bull. Osiris is the form of the bull. And I think this is why they make the mistake of saying, believing that bulls were buried in these incredibly, the precisely crafted huge boxes that is in this subterranean complex that everybody's still scratching their heads to figure out how they got them there, and so much more. But just on that line of thinking, and this comes from The Coffins of Ancient Egypt by Jimmy Dunn writing as Jefferson Monet. And in their ancient language, the sarcophagus might be called Neb-Ankh, possessor of life. There are several other words for coffins and sarcophagi, but perhaps the most relevant to this discussion are wet and suet. We do not precisely understand the meaning of wet, though it appears to be derived from the words for mummy bandage and to embalm. Interesting, right? The Egyptians were attracted to wordplay, so it is likely that no coincidence that another word, wetet, which would have sounded similar, meant to beget. In other words, from the coffin, the deceased will be reborn. So it's the same concept again as these corn mummies. This pun is strengthened by the word suet, used for inner coffins, meaning, which, is the word for egg. And I was told this by one of my early tour guides, that sarcophagus was known as an egg. So again, we're looking from which new life emerges, right?
Which is a seed.
Exactly, and also gives you the association with Easter, this new seeding, the new beginning.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I've made this connection, and I'm looking, researching it on all levels. Including the mythology of the area. And
also Easter is related to Isis, Ast in ancient Egypt. And what is Easter but the time when Isis is resurrected? Never mind. Oh.
What? No, you're exactly on the right line. This is the resurrection. What if this was an ancient seed bank, an ancient Noah's Ark, if you will, waiting for a time because they knew the floods would come? And again, we're going to discuss this at great length. The floods are something that come on a regular basis, annually, and of course throughout the great year. We have the great floods, and so if they understood that a cataclysmic event was going to happen, what do you need to do? You need to save. It's what we do today, right? Mm-hmm. You need to save the seeds of as many things as you possibly can, and possibly the DNA of humans, animals, trees, plant life.
Yeah, I've always wondered if Noah's Ark was actually not containing animals, but maybe containing DNA of animals.
Well, exactly. They wrote in symbolism. They put everything into symbolic format. I don't know that we would have understood it any other way. But we want to take everything at face value. And I think that takes us down, rabbit holes that may not be the right direction. So I'm offering ideas, and this one, and there's also, we talked about Ptah, the projection from out of the blue into form, and Ptah is this is at Saqqara. This is the place of Ptah. And Ptah, the whole mythology of him is he emerges as the mound, Tatanin, Ta, the earth, after the floodwaters recede, right? And
Mount Meru.
Exactly. And this is the mythology of this place. And here we have what I think is, like I said, an ancient seed bank. And this, I was watching a television program that spoke about this seed vault in, I think it's in Norway, and they walked you through it, and you saw how everything was, and immediately I was seeing the Serapeum. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh my gosh, how, of course, these boxes, those lids are 20 to 30 tons on top of these huge boxes, and when sealed, it would have been hermetically sealed. Right. And the box is so heavy that, the floodwaters wouldn't move them. So, yeah, just food for thought.
Do you want to mention that the lids of the boxes are actually cut from the bottom and then placed on the top?
Well, absolutely. I didn't know how deep we wanted to go into this.
Well, maybe we can save that for another presentation.
Yeah, I know we're going to do one totally on just the Serapeum, and
okay, good.
And like so many other things. But I'm planting seeds to open minds to different ways of looking at things. And so this is what I'm doing. Yep. Give it some thought. We're going to go deeper later because there is so much evidence to support this idea. But let's get back to Osiris.
And Quetzalcoatl.
And Enki and Viracocha and Gilgamesh, because they're all Osiris, right? This is a great image of Quetzalcoatl, and you see he is the Ouroboros.
Right, the serpent eating his own tail.
Exactly. And this, again, a theme we see globally throughout ancient cultures. And it's this, this beautiful image that holds so much knowledge. And I want to start planting the seed of the importance of the ecliptic pole. That's all I'm going to do. Just think about it now, maybe look it up, because we're going to go into great detail in an upcoming, very soon presentation about the importance of that ecliptic pole, because that's what it's all about. So this from John Daigle, Mesoamerica's version of the Ouroboros symbol of cyclical return. The surest meaning of Quetzalcoatl's return is wholeness and completion as defined by cycle closure in relation to Maya's galactic cosmology and the Toltec zenith cosmology. It's the same thing. It's always the same thing. Was Quetzalcoatl the feathered serpent, or was he riding the serpent? You see, both the imagery. You know, the serpent. I'm going to put this out there. Is Draco. On one level, and on one very important level. Draco is he is so connected with how we move through procession and where our state of consciousness is. What time is it? Where is Horus? It's where are we at as we're moving around these circumpolar stars, right? Really important stuff. And this swallowing of the human, we're going to see this in so much imagery. It's going to blow your minds that this has all been out there for so long.
Right. Even in corporate logos.
Oh, yeah, it's everywhere. It's best. It's it's in New Zealand. It's in Hawaii. It's everywhere. Polynesia, you name it. And even medieval imagery. It's just incredible, and what it means is so dynamic. But again, you know, we've been talking about this, the land and the resurrection of the land. And I wanted to give you an idea, because this is so important. All of the structures, the Giza Plateau, and all of the temples up and down the Nile, and even into Fayum, because the Nile flood definitely affected Fayum. There were lots of offshoots over into that area.
There were pyramids on
and they
island
would direct canals into that area, and yeah, pyramids.
In the Fayum Delta.
Exactly. And so this flooding, when the floods came, underneath all of these temples were aquifers and man-made tunnels with water flowing, right? So when the Nile receded, it took the life force, right, from the temples. But when the Nile floods came, it rejuvenates not only the agriculture, but all of the temples. The Giza Plateau comes alive with surging water through these underground subterranean, structures, and
man-made subterranean structures.
Right, and creates this highly charged ionic atmosphere that brings these temples, these structures, which are living. They're built to be living structures based on a combination of rocks and minerals and sacred geometry. And then with this water surging underneath, they are alive.
It's almost like a giant computer with circuits placed in certain places, and the water is the power source that turns it on.
Exactly. Water is life. And can you imagine? So it's like the whole, all of Egypt is breathing again, and their structures and their temples. And you go into these places and it surges through you. These are places, the temples were per baz, according to Hakim. And so these are places for altering of consciousness. So you can imagine how amazing it would have been to experience these sites with this water surging. And when they built these dams, they sadly cut off the life force of Egypt. And I, for one, would like to see, the dams come down. Prepare the people, of course, but wouldn't it be amazing to see that life force back again? We forget how important it is when we dam our rivers. We're damming the life force. It's like the bloodstreams of, the earth.
Right, not just Egypt, but everywhere.
Everywhere. And to take note, when we stop the flow of nature, there are repercussions, and we are feeling it in Egypt. We where we never used to need, and I don't think we do today. But another presentation is, my friend our friend Susan Moore and I have looked at how they were doing, some of these the things that they were building to enhance seed growth. They were able to feed millions of people for thousands of years, which is unheard of in ancient times. Most civilizations only lasted a couple hundred years.
Right.
And ancient Egypt was incredible because they knew they had technologies to enhance agriculture. And even livestock, they were able to even change the DNA of livestock
Mm.
to enable them to live through droughts, if you can imagine. So Egypt was amazing on so many different
Right.
levels.
Even up to the end of ancient Egypt, they were the breadbasket of the Roman Empire.
Exactly, absolutely. So, and this, of course, is now gone, and it's for me, it's just a very sad thing, and it is typical of where we're at in the cycle. It's what we've done to ourselves. It's what we've done to our bodies. We don't eat health giving, health, alive. We don't eat the food that enhances, our being. We eat, so many things with chemicals and processed foods and, synthetics. And, this is indicative to where we're at, but that doesn't mean that we can't say enough is enough and, change what's happening, and get back to nature and to honor the forces of nature like they did back in the ancient times.
Right. We have the power to change the pattern
Oh,
anytime we want.
in any given moment, change the breath, change the cycle. You're absolutely right. And, it all starts with me. So again, yes, Ka of Ra, the life force of the land and its people, is this breath of water. And it's not only the water above, but the electromagnetic water, the flow, the plasma, the energy, the earth grids. It's all of these things. This is the life force of the land. And it would be so much better if we were ready to absorb that and not dam it up. And here is an image, and it's an image of Ha'api, and he is both male and female. So he goes back to a time before, the great division into, the recognition that I am only a female and you're a male. There was once a time when we understood that, we are 98% the same. There's only 2% difference between a man and a woman. And to have this great, depth of separation between the sexes has also caused so many, it's separation consciousness. If we could just remember we are all connected, we are all one, and we are more alike than we are different, it would change so much. But anyway, I get off topic. What's fascinating here is Ha'api represents the fertility of the Nile. And here you see him, he's nurturing the Ba of Osiris with the two waters of heaven, the Milky Way, and earth, the Nile. So they're bringing, again, this unification between heaven and earth with the great flood. And this concept of Osiris, as representing, again, this harvest. He's nurturing him with the two waters to unify the Ba and Ka for Osiris to be reborn or resurrected. And this becomes even more important when you remember that Ha'api is the symbol for Aquarius.
Mm-hmm. I was just going to say.
Yeah, good. Because we are entering the age of Aquarius, and this is that moment in time. And Allan and I are going to go into a lot more detail about why and how this all works. But here he is. This is a beautiful image of Hapi on the left inside the Ouroboros, right? There's your serpent. And he is releasing the two waters. And this is to represent a cave. This is Temple of Isis at Philae. It was moved to the island. but it represents a cave that's underneath. Some say, some mythologies say Biga, which is an island right across from the island of Philae, and some say under Elephantine. It's basically that particular area. It has to do with where the Tropic of Cancer hits, because on the solstice at that time at noon, actually, yeah, at noon, the sun was at its peak on the Tropic of Cancer.
Directly overhead. Okay.
Directly overhead at Philae and Elephantine. So that was a huge celebration and had to do with cycles, because then the sun stops for a moment, solstice, and then it starts on its path down, right, to the Tropic of Capricorn.
Right.
So again, this recognition of this, there's this kingdom of heaven, kingdom of hell, and how the cycles work, the eternal cycles. But the other image on the right, I like to point this out because so many people place them side by side and talk about aliens and astronauts. But what you're seeing is the Ouroboros on the right as well. And I believe he's holding the bag, right?
He's got a little bag, yeah.
So maybe, just maybe, it's not an astronaut and we're looking at something. What that helmet around him is actually the head of the serpent, right? If you look real close. So maybe it's not a helmet, but this is just me. I'm always looking for something deeper. So yeah. And by the way,
not always aliens.
Now they say this is he sits on the belly of the great rattlesnake. Well, that's a serpent, right? So yeah, fascinating. And again, here it is. You can see it. This in the cave. You can see the stones here, and then Hapi in the cave. And this is an image of Hathor, and she is actually nurturing again the crops. And this is the Ba of Osiris. So, yeah.
And that's the hieroglyph, by the way. That bar at the bottom is the hieroglyph for Ta, meaning land.
Yep. So the emergence after the floodwaters recede. So, fascinating. And it's all about patterns of birth, life, death, and renewal. And I bring this in because it's just incredible. I had to piece this together. We saw this, I had part of this image from when we were at the Met, and part of this image from somewhere else, and I pieced them together because you have to see the whole thing. And so it's a papyrus from the 19th dynasty tomb of Ani. And here you see it's actually Nun on the far right, but there are the two waters of heaven and earth, right? So if you look, the eye, which is our perception, right? It's within, right? It's within the circle. But the eye on the right is outside, right? So it's an interdimensional gateway. That's basically Rasto, if you will, a symbol that is used to indicate the first time, right? So the first time of life on Earth, and the perception is outside of the container. So it's either contained, in other words, unification, right? The inner eye, consciousness within the primordial waters, unity consciousness, and or consciousness without, the interdimensional gateway to the physical, separation consciousness. We're always looking, we're looking outside ourselves to define who we are instead of looking within and feeling our connection to all that is. Really interesting, non-material versus material, consciousness imagining and consciousness creating. We only create in a world that's alive and moving, and we imagine in a world that's contained, unity consciousness. We imagine things into being. Really fascinating. Birth, death, and rebirth. And again, it's all about the harvest. In the Egyptian Book of the Dead, man at the moment of his death is represented as a grain of corn which falls into the earth in order to draw from its bosom a new life. Beautiful. So in the end, it's all bioorganic processes. The tiny seed, I love this meme. The tiny seed knew that in order to grow, it needed to be dropped in the dirt, covered in darkness, and struggle to reach the light. Of course, we're in the night cycle. Of course, we're in the dream time, because this is that moment that we get to experience life, physical pleasures and choice, and an opportunity to learn, and then struggle to find that moment of complete bliss. We lined up to be here. And I love this message. Only in my pain did I find my will. Only in my chaos did I learn to be still. Only in my fear did I find my might, and only in my darkness did I see my light. We want to experience this. Like I said, I really believe we all lined up to be here now.
Right. We were born to experience this physical world for a reason.
Exactly.
And not just to amuse ourselves.
Nope. Well, I don't know. It is kind of amusing sometimes.
Well, you have to stop and smell the roses, but there's
Well, we
work to
can
do.
only hope. So that completes our star seeding. And so when I emulate it to the stars, we're really talking about, life occurs when heaven and earth separate. We are seeded from the heavens. And we'll talk at great length again about the concept of star seeds and what that means, and how our DNA changes from the movement of the stars in the heavens, the planetary beings. The movement makes a difference to how we perceive reality and what we call an earth-based perception.
That's so interesting, because if you think about it, if any of the planets in our solar system weren't there, we would have a completely different reality.
Yep. So true. Yeah, and we're going to go into great depth about the circumpolar stars and how it affects where we're at, and how that affects how we perceive reality. We're going to go into great depth, and it's going to be fun. You're going to be blown away, I promise.
Do you want to mention the tours that you have coming up?
Well, I do have two big tours coming up this winter. I have one with Jocelyn Starfeather, which I'm really excited about. The tour is filling, and we do need to have registrations in as soon as possible. It's a great group forming, and that's going to be in March. The astrology, Jocelyn's an astrologer, and she chose the month because the astrology is just incredible. Fabulous time to come and experience the temples in Egypt. And then I have another tour with Brian Forrester and my friend Susan Moore, the geologist, world-class geologist, Jurassic geologist, in April. And we're going to have several privates. With Jocelyn, we're going to have privates at the Osirian and the King's Chamber, well, all three chambers of the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx. And with Brian and Susan, we're going to go to Abu Ruwash, which we haven't done in several years. And of course, the Osirian, everyone needs to see the Osirian up close and personal. The pyramid, and also the step pyramid will be a special private. It's open. The step pyramid has been open for visitors, but you can only go to a place where you look down at the big box, stone box. Whereas we're going to open the northern entrance where you can actually go in. You feel like Indiana Jones.
Oh, wow.
Down into the step pyramid. So one of
I've seen that door, but it's always locked.
Well, it's going to be open for our group, and you're going to be able to go down up close and personal and see the box. Absolutely incredible. And the walls, there's just so much inside that is incredible. And of course we'll talk about the how important the kings, the ceremonies that they did, and everything that, the site of Saqqara is just incredible. We're going to explore it on both tours, go to the Serapeum. So if you want to come, Egypt tourism has exploded and venues are filling fast. So you really need to sign up very quickly, get your deposits in so you can secure your place. But I can tell you that both of these tours are going to be exceptional experiences. if you've ever had a desire to come and experience Egypt.
And the new museum is open now, isn't it?
Well, we don't know. I can't promise. We do feel it will be, but then they've been promising for several years. They've just announced a soft opening, and what that means is they're charging a hefty sum. I think it's $2,000, possibly per person, to not even see the main galleries. So little by little, we're edging closer. I know they're pretty much complete and ready to go. They just, they want to open with a great, huge celebration, and they're probably in the planning stages of that now.
Well,
So
fingers crossed that'll be.
Yeah, I'm going to be first in line as soon as it's open. So very excited.
But anybody who's been dreaming about a trip to Egypt your whole life, check these out, because Patricia is by far the best tour leader in Egypt. You won't have a better trip.
I pay him to say that.
Not at all. It's my experience. So.
Well, thanks, Allan. Much appreciated.
Anyway, thanks everybody. We have a lot more coming, so stay tuned. And thank you, Patricia. We'll talk very soon.
Great. Thanks, Allan.